diminished scale and what it is, and maybe how you use it, but how you might practically approach getting some of these sounds in a more comfortable way on the guitar. It's quite a fun thing to mess around with. It's good because it's such a distinct sound. I think it's one of the most distinct sort of tonalities that jumps out as has quite prominent personality. Like whenever you hear it in anything, it's like very hard to ignore. So you may already know the formula of a diminished scale kind of sound is pretty much, you know, if you look at it on the guitar, you're going to be like, go 1 fret, skip a fret, then 1 fret, skip a fret. So, and that's the formula for the scale. So it's a simple concept with a very, very kind of unusual sound. You quite often hear diminished arpeggios, which is like this kind of sound, which is just minor thirds, which is essentially every other note of a diminished scale. Now, people kind of split a diminished scale into two things, half whole or whole half. If you look at the formula and how it's arranged, the notes, you can see, well, it's a half step and then a whole step. Or if you choose to look at it the other way, it's a whole step and then a half step. And it can change the feeling of it quite a bit depending on how you use it. In the way I think it seems to sit okay on the guitar is this kind of fingering. If I'm playing it line wise, I generally don't even bother with the low 2 strings because I don't like how it lines up. But you can finger it in a way on the top 4 strings at least, so that the first finger there's a note always on the same fret for the first finger. I'll just play it really slow, this kind of fingering. You can do more or less notes per string, but this is kind of a quick example. And I find this quite practical because the first finger is just it's a point of reference. The way I'm viewing it, I suppose this is playing it this way. Well, it depends on the way you look at it, but so if I talk about how you might use this, or you could just use it for its own sake, like I did at the start, and just to have its own character, which is, and you know, it's a pretty cool sound in general. But you can use it in more conventional music as well, just to give like a ooh effect. Sometimes, let's say you're playing. The reason I like this fingering, it lines up with quite normal stuff pretty well. Like, let's say if it's like a blues or a funky thing, like it's just kind of normal sounding stuff. You can sort of slip that in fairly comfortably because of the fingering. So much of it's to do with the fingering. If you're thinking, you know, a lot of people coming from this background and play blues or something, they have an idea that it's okay, well, this is comfortable, this is like the box or whatever. And you can dip into that funny sound because the fingers line up just the same. You'll notice on it, if you view a diminished scale this way, here in this example, I'm thinking of kind of the root as being A. It's kind of like a blues sound, which is like an A7 sharp 9 sound. It lines up kind of nice because in blues, when you're playing that, you're very often having this minor third and a major third, or bending somewhere in between. And obviously this fingering, when it lines up over the top of that, has both of those anyway, so that's kind of nice. has this note, the sharp 4 or the sharp 11, however you want to call it, relative to the, if we're viewing this as the root, that would be, which you may know as the blues note. You can end up with this kind of more angular sound when you use that note to resolve anywhere other than one above or one below. The most approachable way to use a blues note that you hear a lot is just going or going, so either up from it. But if you're thinking some angular ideas, you can get some sounds like that or whatever. Anything just simple, it immediately starts to sound different. And it also has natural 13, which comes up in this bluesy kind of sound a lot. This especially is something angular. So it kind of, the only really kind of especially unusual note for this context is this flat 9, B flat 9 if you're viewing it relative to this root. Not too often in playing blues. Probably you hear this a lot. And people are used to that sound enough that it doesn't jar them, but you can definitely get away with it as a like effect. That brings me to another point of what I just did there. With this fingering, naturally the diminished scale, because of its formula, pretty much if you view it, you'll realize that it just repeats every 3 frets. So what that tells you, if you have this fingering down, you can pick any of these notes and then just slide up to the corresponding shape and continue the line. And it gives it, I find, gives quite more of a vocal-like effect. Connects things up a little nicely. So I think that's something that's definitely worth exploring on the guitar. If you don't do that, it's something that not every instrument can do, so it's a nice thing to make use of. So that's kind of one way you can mess around with that shape, but another way would be if we can leave the diminished shape here and see how else it might be used. So obviously this is quite a tense sort of sound. I think most people would probably agree it's a bit tense and it's a bit ambiguous. There's no, if we're just playing free, there's not even like a clear tonic. That could be because, because as we say with a diminished scale, because it repeats every 3 frets, there's not that many, this could be viewed as different ways. There's really only 3 different diminished scales. There's this one, there's this one, and there's this one. And then you'll realize once you're back there, they've looped around. So it's potentially, the root could really be kind of anything in the scale, to be honest. Because it's such a repeating sort of pattern. So yeah, we've had that established then, that it's a kind of tense, ambiguous sound. Kind of, if you hear, more kind of traditional music, if we leave this scale here, the diminished sort of sound, that might line itself up nicely to be resolved. If you were to resolve it to like a typical sounding chord, some kind of D major, sounds like that. Hopefully that's fairly familiar. Since when I'm looking at this, I would probably find it easier to view it related to this fingering for a D major. If you're thinking of like a D major key center, just to get that sound in your mind. It lines up pretty this fingering. If you were to do your diminished scale here. And then naturally once you're here, you can feel free to move around as normal. Back into D major. So that's kind of another way. Those are 2 ways, or 3 ways, I guess. You know, just it has its own character that's definitely valid. It kind of fits in like a bluesy, funky kind of thing, you know. Just for a little bit of a whoa effect. Or it can be used in like a tension and release kind of way. Resolving to something, if you're viewing this as the root, resolving to something. You're treating this as like the 5 to a 1 basically. Or it can be used in its own, just on its own as its own character. So yeah, hopefully that's something fun that's worth exploring. There's probably, if you mess around with it, there's probably 1 or 2 things you'll find, you know, fresh kind of sound or something like that. So hopefully that's useful. Thanks for watching.